The relentless hum of Washington, D.C., a city perpetually abuzz with the silent whir of influence and the distant echo of policy debates, felt a world away from the unassuming quiet of the daily grind. A small, independently owned coffee shop nestled in a bustling yet remarkably diverse neighborhood. At precisely 7:17 a.m., long before the Capitol truly stirred to life, director Alani Dubois, a woman whose name alone commanded hushed reverence in the most secure corridors of power, sat alone at a chipped formica table. Her presence was a deliberate contradiction to her immense authority as the Director of Homeland Security, a role that positioned her at the very epicenter of national security and intelligence. She wore a simple, unadorned charcoal gray pantsuit, a crisp white blouse, and practical, low-heeled black pumps, an outfit that spoke of quiet competence rather than overt power. Her natural hair, typically pulled back in a neat, no-nonsense bun for official engagements, was casually tied in a loose braid, framing a face that, despite the weight of her responsibilities, held an almost serene composure. This was her sanctuary, a deliberate counterpoint to the bulletproof glass and coated silence of her executive office. Here, amidst the gentle clatter of ceramic mugs, the rhythmic hiss of the espresso machine, and the low murmur of morning commuters, Alani found a semblance of anonymity, a precious commodity in her highly visible life. She wasn't just observing, she was listening, absorbing the unfiltered rhythms of everyday life, a grounding exercise that kept her connected to the very people she swore an oath to protect. While the world believed her to be ensconced in secure bunkers, making life or death decisions, she was here, sipping chamomile tea, a seemingly ordinary black woman blending effortlessly into the tapestry of urban life. Yet beneath the calm facade, her mind, a finely tuned instrument of strategic thought, was actively processing. Her tablet, propped subtly beside her mug, displayed a complex cybersecurity threat matrix, intricate lines of code and data flow, a silent, swirling vortex of potential global disruptions. She preferred the analog world of a physical notebook for her most critical insights, jotting down cryptic notes in a personal shorthand known only to her. Her eyes, dark and perceptive, swept over the faces around her. A young student buried in textbooks, an elderly couple sharing a croissant, a construction worker grabbing a quick coffee. Each glance was a silent study, a subtle assessment of vulnerabilities and strengths, a habit ingrained from years of national service. Alani Dubois' journey to the pinnacle of national security was a testament to extraordinary resilience and an unyielding spirit. Born into poverty in a segregated neighborhood, she had navigated systemic barriers, racial discrimination, and entrenched biases at every turn. Her early life was a constant struggle, marked by the quiet determination to prove her worth in a world that often sought to diminish it. She had worked her way through law school, served with distinction in the FBI, and swiftly climbed the ranks within various intelligence agencies, shattering glass ceilings with every promotion. Her rise was not fueled by ambition for power itself, but by an unwavering belief in justice and a profound commitment to protecting the vulnerable. This internal conflict, the profound desire to safeguard the nation and its citizens, even from within the very systems that sometimes failed them, pitted against the pervasive weariness of facing subtle, often unspoken prejudice from those she led or encountered in her daily life, was a perpetual undercurrent in her life. She often found herself grappling with the irony that her greatest professional achievements were often met with an undercurrent of skepticism, a subtle questioning of her qualifications, simply because of the color of her skin and her gender. Beyond the weight of her immense responsibilities and the demands of her public office, Alani possessed a profound, almost secret, wellspring of compassion. Her philanthropic endeavors were meticulous in their anonymity, designed to provide genuine uplift without drawing any attention to herself. One of her most cherished initiatives involved a discreet yet deeply impactful program dedicated to assisting homeless veterans reintegrate into society. This wasn't a mere financial donation. It was a deeply personal commitment. Every month, she would personally and anonymously leave a thick envelope of cash, alongside a handwritten, unsigned note of encouragement, at a community center that offered shelter and vocational training to former service members. Just last week, while reviewing a classified briefing on domestic terrorism threats, a small, worn envelope had been delivered to her private office, bypassing layers of security protocols through an intricate, prearranged system known only to her most trusted aides. Inside was a simple, heartfelt card addressed to the unseen angel. It was from a family she had helped, a veteran struggling with PTSD and his young children, now thriving in a small, renovated home, the rent paid for 2 years by her anonymous generosity. The card contained a crude, crayon drawing of a smiling family and a handwritten message. "Because of you, we have hope." Alani had traced the crayon lines with a delicate finger, a rare, soft smile gracing her lips, a moment of profound, quiet satisfaction that nourished her soul far more than any presidential commendation. This small, private act, a testament to her humility and profound empathy, reaffirmed her belief that true success lay not in accumulation, but in impact, in the lives she could quietly touch and transform. As the morning sun began to filter through the cafe's front window, casting long, golden streaks across the worn wooden floor, Alani closed her tablet. The dark screen reflected her own composed, determined face, framed by the subtle glow of the city coming to life. She glanced down at her wrist. There, barely visible beneath the cuff of her modest blouse, was a simple, elegant silver watch. It wasn't a flashy designer piece, but a custom-made, military-grade timepiece, its minimalist face hiding an encrypted satellite communication module and a direct, secure link to the National Command Center. A small, almost imperceptible red light flickered twice, then went dark. It was a silent, coded alert, a signal of a routine security check from her shadow detail. She gave a quick, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of acknowledgement to the unseen presence, a habit so ingrained it was almost unconscious. She understood that sometimes the most powerful individuals were those who could move through the world unseen, observing without being observed. Tomorrow, this very principle of calculated anonymity would be tested, not in the high stakes of national security, but in the mundane, yet deeply personal arena of a local courtroom. The air within Courtroom 3B of the District Superior Court, usually thick with the solemn gravity of legal proceedings and the hushed whispers of justice, felt particularly stifling that morning. The stale scent of old paper, polished wood, and faint disinfectant clung to everything, a testament to countless dramas played out within its hallowed walls. Alani Dubois, ever the observer, sat 3 rows back in the public gallery, her presence indistinguishable from any other concerned citizen. She wore the same charcoal gray suit, chosen specifically for its bland anonymity, her hair still in its casual braid. Her eyes, however, missed nothing. Every nervous tick of the young defendant, every shift in the prosecutor's posture, every subtle nuance in the judge's expression, all were meticulously catalogued by her preternaturally observant mind. Her reason for being there was a deeply personal one, yet intertwined with her professional ethos. The defendant, Jamal Dixon, a bright, promising black college student, was her neighbor. He was a quiet, earnest young man, known in the community for his volunteer work at the local library and his passion for astrophysics. Jamal stood accused of a petty larceny, a charge Alani knew, with an almost visceral certainty, was utterly false. Her instinct, honed by years of uncovering intricate deceptions, screamed injustice. She had come to observe, to understand how the system, at its most fundamental level, functioned, or in this case, malfunctioned. The prosecution's star witness, and indeed the primary architect of the flimsy case against Jamal, was Detective Sergeant Miller. A man in his late 40s, Miller cut an imposing figure, his uniform pressed meticulously, his bald pate gleaming under the courtroom lights. But his meticulously maintained exterior belied an internal landscape of arrogance, self-satisfaction, and a profound, almost pathological disdain for anyone he deemed beneath him. His face, ruddy and jowly, often settled into a sneer when he spoke to, or about, those he considered the usual suspects, a coded term he often used to dismiss and dehumanize minority defendants. Miller believed himself untouchable, a paragon of law enforcement, and his history, meticulously researched by Alani through unofficial channels, revealed a pattern of solved cases built on dubious evidence and coerced confessions, all expertly swept under the rug by a complicit internal affairs system that valued conviction rates over justice. He was a master manipulator, cloaking his prejudices in the guise of professional rigor. His smug satisfaction as he recounted a fabricated narrative designed to ensnare Jamal grated on Alani's nerves like fingernails on a chalkboard. The defense attorney, Ms. Rachel Green, was a young, earnest public defender. Her spirit was willing, but her experience was clearly lacking. Her voice, though firm, trembled slightly as she cross-examined Miller, attempting to poke holes in his testimony. Rachel, a recent law school graduate, possessed a burning sense of justice, a stark contrast to the jaded cynicism that often permeated the legal system. She genuinely believed in Jamal's innocence and fought passionately, but she was outmaneuvered at every turn by Miller's practiced evasiveness and the subtle, almost imperceptible nods of complicity from the prosecution. Alani watched Rachel with a mix of admiration and quiet frustration, recognizing the raw, untapped potential in the young lawyer, but also the daunting odds she faced against such an entrenched system. During Rachel's cross-examination, as she pressed Miller on the inconsistencies of his forensic evidence, Miller's composure began to fray. He smirked, visibly annoyed by the persistent questioning from a junior attorney. His voice, already laced with thinly veiled contempt, grew sharper. "Look, counselor," he drawled, his eyes sweeping over Rachel's earnest face, then dismissing her with a dismissive wave of his hand. "You public defenders always think you're so clever, don't you? Always trying to twist things. The kid's guilty. We both know it. He fits the profile. Always does." The last sentence was delivered with a heavy, insulting implication, a subtle yet unmistakable reference to Jamal's race. Alani's grip on the armrest tightened almost imperceptibly. Her internal radar, honed by years of navigating subtle and overt biases, began to blare. This wasn't just frustration. It was a clear display of discriminatory behavior, fueled by preconceived notions about who belonged in a courtroom as a defendant. As Rachel, visibly flustered but refusing to yield, pressed on, Miller's eyes swept across the public gallery. His gaze, laced with a casual, almost unconscious disdain, flickered over Alani. He saw a neatly dressed black woman, seemingly ordinary, and dismissed her as irrelevant. He then exchanged a quick, knowing glance with a uniformed patrolman, Officer Jenkins, seated a few rows behind Alani. Jenkins, a burly officer in his late 30s, had a reputation for being a loyal subordinate to Miller, often mirroring his superior's prejudices, albeit with less overt malice. Jenkins, catching Miller's eye, offered a subtle, almost imperceptible smirk, a silent acknowledgement of their shared contempt for the defendant and the type he represented. Miller, emboldened by Jenkins's silent complicity, then leaned closer to the microphone, ostensibly addressing Rachel, but his voice carried, deliberate and theatrical, meant for the entire courtroom to hear. "Honestly, counselor," he scoffed, his gaze still sweeping dismissively over the gallery, momentarily settling on Alani. "It's always the same. They always look the same. You try to help these people, but they just don't get it. They keep falling back into old habits. It's in their nature, I guess." His words, delivered with a smug, self-righteous air, were thinly veiled racial slurs, designed to dehumanize Jamal and, by extension, anyone who resembled him. The implication was clear. Jamal's guilt was inherent, rooted in his race, not in any actual evidence. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery, quickly stifled by the rigid formality of the court. Even Judge Harrison, a seasoned, albeit often weary, white judge in his late 60s, who had initially seemed bored and inclined to trust the police's narrative in minor cases, stirred uncomfortably on the bench. He rapped his gavel lightly, his brow furrowed. "Detective Sergeant Miller, watch your language. This is a court of law, not a soapbox." His voice was tinged with annoyance, but lacked true conviction. He seemed more concerned with maintaining decorum than with addressing the underlying racism. Miller, however, merely offered a condescending shrug to the judge, a dismissive gesture that conveyed both his contempt for the proceedings and his utter certainty that he would face no real consequences. He then turned his full attention back to Rachel, his lips curling into a sneer. "With all due respect, Your Honor, I'm just stating facts. Some people just don't fit into decent society. It's a pattern we see every day." His eyes, cold and dismissive, once again swept over Jamal, then lingered on Alani in the gallery, as if to underscore his prejudiced point. Alani's internal alarm bells, already ringing, now screamed. This wasn't just rudeness. It was a brazen public act of discrimination, a chilling abuse of power in a place where justice was supposed to be blind. It was a direct affront to Jamal's dignity, to Rachel's earnest efforts, and to the very principles of fairness that Alani had dedicated her life to upholding. Her hands remained casually in her lap, but her gaze hardened, a flicker of cold, absolute resolve hardening behind her eyes. This wasn't just about Jamal anymore. This was about the insidious rot within the system, the blatant disregard for justice, the casual cruelty inflicted by those sworn to protect. To allow this to stand, to retreat into her anonymity, would be to betray not just herself, but every single individual who had faced similar indignities, every vulnerable person whose voice had been silenced by the very institutions meant to serve them. This was her point of no return. The quiet observer had reached her limit. Justice, she decided, would begin right here, in this courtroom, not in the shadows, but in the glaring light of public scrutiny. She would not back down. The oppressive silence that followed Detective Sergeant Miller's thinly veiled racial slurs in Courtroom 3B was heavier than the humid courtroom air, suffocating the last vestiges of casual legal procedure. His triumphant, condescending smirk, just moments before directed at Jamal and Rachel, solidified on his face, a grotesque mask of self-righteous bigotry. Officer Jenkins, seated behind Alani, still wore his subtle, shared smirk, a silent echo of his superior's disdain. Even Judge Harrison, usually a figure of calm authority, appeared momentarily stunned, his gavel frozen mid-air, a silent testament to the raw, unadulterated prejudice that had just been unleashed. The collective discomfort in the gallery was almost palpable, a thick, suffocating cloud of unspoken outrage. Dr. Alani Dubois, however, remained outwardly impassive. Her earlier anonymity, her carefully constructed deference, had vanished as if shed with an unwanted skin. In its place was a stillness that was far more unnerving than any outburst of anger. Her dark eyes, no longer veiled by the persona of a meek, unassuming citizen, now held an icy precision, stripping away Miller's bravado with a single unblinking stare. She wasn't merely seeing a prejudiced police officer. She was seeing a systemic flaw, a gaping wound in the fabric of justice, a manifestation of the very biases she had spent a lifetime quietly dismantling within the federal government. Miller's actions weren't just an inconvenience. They were a brazen, public affront to her personal dignity, an audacious breach of the very principles of fairness she swore to uphold, and, most damningly, an act of overt discrimination against an innocent young man in a court of law. Alani had faced down international terror cells and navigated treacherous geopolitical negotiations. Detective Sergeant Miller, with his petty cruelty and ingrained arrogance, was merely another obstacle, albeit one far beneath her usual purview, that needed to be neutralized with swift, surgical precision. Detective Sergeant Miller, Alani's voice, when it finally cut through the tense silence, was not loud, but it resonated with a chilling, surgical precision that made even the judge's gavel seem to recede into insignificance. It was devoid of anger or any discernible emotion, which made it all the more terrifying. Each word was carefully enunciated, imbued with an undeniable, yet understated authority that compelled every eye in the courtroom to snap towards her. Your recent testimony and public statements constitute not only a direct violation of every professional standard in law enforcement, but also a blatant act of discriminatory misconduct, a severe breach of ethical conduct, and a profound disrespect for the judicial process itself. Her eyes, sharp and unwavering, held Miller's, compelling the detective to look at her, truly look at her, for the first time without the lens of his ingrained prejudice. Miller, still riding the high of his self-perceived dominance, opened his mouth to retort, perhaps another condescending remark, or a panicked, ill-conceived justification. "And who exactly are you, lady, to tell me how to do my job?" He scoffed, attempting to regain control, his voice laced with the same dismissive arrogance. Some armchair lawyer from the cheap seats? But Alani cut him off with a single, decisive gesture of her hand, a subtle, almost imperceptible flick of her wrist that nonetheless carried immense, silencing weight. Her gaze, cold and unyielding, pinned him. "I advise you to reconsider your next words, Detective Sergeant Miller. Every action you have taken, every word you have uttered since I entered this courtroom, is being duly noted and will be accounted for. Furthermore, you are already in severe violation of numerous clauses within your department's code of conduct and, I assure you, federal statutes. Do you understand the gravity of what you have just done?" Miller's face, which had been pale with a mix of confusion and indignation, now flushed scarlet, then drained again to an ashen gray. He tried to force a dismissive laugh, a scoff, but it died in his throat, strangled by a dawning, profound terror. The cold steel in Alani's gaze was unsettling. It was the look of someone who saw through him, not just to his petty cruelty, but to the deeper, systemic rot beneath. The casual power he wielded over ordinary citizens had just evaporated, replaced by a terrifying sense of his own vulnerability. He shifted uncomfortably on the witness stand, his hands visibly trembling. Then, with a deliberate, almost ritualistic movement, Alani reached into her simple, unassuming black handbag. The entire courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath, wondering what mundane object she might produce, a forgotten tissue perhaps, or a complaint form she intended to fill out. Her hand emerged, clutching a slim, dark leather card holder. It was an unassuming object, one she carried with her constantly, a quiet repository of her true identity, a testament to her unyielding control. She unfastened the magnetic clasp of the card holder with a soft, almost imperceptible click. Her fingers, nimble and practiced from countless rapid identifications of classified documents, slid out a gleaming object. It wasn't a mundane driver's license. It wasn't a standard police ID badge. It wasn't even a typical corporate employee card. Under the harsh, overhead fluorescent lights of the courtroom, a platinum card, meticulously engraved, flashed, its polished surface reflecting a blinding glint. Adjacent to it, nestled securely in a clear plastic sleeve within the holder, was another, equally imposing credential. Emblazoned clearly on its face, beneath the elegant, stylized eagle seal of the Department of Homeland Security, were the words, "United States Department of Homeland Security, Director Alani Dubois, National Command Access." Below that, a discreet yet clearly visible holographic security strip shimmered, a silent invitation to immediate, verifiable authentication by any federal agency. It was a credential that granted her unrestricted access to the most sensitive national security operations, unquestionable authority over myriad federal assets, and the power to demand compliance from any contracted entity operating under her purview. Alani did not speak. She simply held the card holder aloft, her arm steady, her expression unreadable. She held it just for a few seconds, long enough for the light to catch it, long enough for its stark, undeniable authority to sink into the collective consciousness of the courtroom. Detective Sergeant Miller, Officer Jenkins, Judge Harrison, Ms. Rachel Green, and the stunned reporters scrambling in the back rows. A collective gasp swept through the small group, quickly followed by a profound, almost terrifying silence. The court reporter stopped typing. The judge's gavel clattered to the bench. The snickers from Officer Jenkins died abruptly, choked off by dawning horror. His face, which moments before had held casual disdain or bored indifference, was now etched with incredulity and dawning dread. This wasn't just another citizen. This was something else entirely. This was the Director of Homeland Security. Detective Sergeant Miller, who had been trying to regain some semblance of composure, saw the card. His face, which had been set in an arrogant sneer, instantly froze. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving him a sickly, pallid white. His jaw went slack, his eyes wide with a sudden, dawning, profound comprehension. The blood rushed from his face, leaving it pasty and ghost-like. His carefully constructed facade of superiority, built on years of petty power plays and ingrained prejudice, shattered in an instant, revealing the hollow, terrified man beneath. The implications were a cold, hard slap to his overinflated ego, a sudden, brutal shattering of his sense of untouchable privilege. His eyes darted wildly, frantically from the gleaming card to Alani's unflinching gaze, then to the stunned faces of the jury and the motionless judge, a silent, desperate plea for rescue that no one would answer. Judge Harrison, who had been observing the commotion from his bench, snapped to rigid attention, his body language shifting instantly from weary annoyance to profound deference. He knew who Director Alani Dubois was by reputation, a reclusive, immensely powerful, notoriously private figure. He knew he had just narrowly avoided a catastrophic misjudgment, almost allowing an act of blatant prejudice to unfold unchecked in his own courtroom, directly in front of one of the most powerful people in the country. He subtly, almost imperceptibly, nodded to the court bailiff, a silent acknowledgement of the seismic shift in power. In the press of shocked onlookers, Agent Miller, Alani's personal security detail, discreetly pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over the record button. He had witnessed this countless times, the slow, agonizing realization on people's faces as they grasped the true identity of the quiet woman they had just underestimated. This time, however, he had a direct order from Alani herself. Document everything. He began to record, ensuring every word, every contorted expression, every flicker of fear was captured. The bailiff, sensing the gravity of the moment, quickly ensured no other recording devices were present, but Agent Miller's was encrypted and unnoticed. Alani, having allowed the card's profound significance to fully register with Miller, Jenkins, and the stunned courtroom, slowly, deliberately, returned it to her cardholder, tucking it away with the same practiced ease with which she had produced it. The brief flash of platinum was gone, but its indelible impact lingered, a cold, hard truth that had irrevocably reset the entire dynamic of the courtroom. The air, once thick with Miller's contempt, was now heavy with his terror, and a building wave of quiet, almost reverent respect from the observing Judge Harrison and the stunned, grateful face of Rachel Green. "Detective Sergeant Miller," Alani stated, her voice returning to its calm, judicial cadence, but now imbued with an undeniable steely edge that had been absent before. "Your outburst, your derogatory remarks, your blatant discriminatory actions, and your gross professional misconduct constitute a severe breach of conduct, gross professional misconduct, and a clear violation of federal civil rights statutes. You are now formally relieved of duty, effective immediately, pending a full federal investigation. And let me be perfectly clear. Your employment with this police department, and indeed, your future in any form of law enforcement, is, as of this moment, over." She paused, allowing her words to sink in, their weight crushing Miller's last vestiges of defiance. She then turned her gaze to Officer Jenkins, his face now pale with fear. "As for you, Officer Jenkins," Alani continued, her voice unwavering, "your unprofessional behavior, your participation in Detective Sergeant Miller's discriminatory actions, and your failure to uphold the basic tenets of respectful service and ethical conduct mean that you are also placed on immediate administrative leave, pending a comprehensive internal investigation by the Department of Homeland Security." She paused, her eyes piercing Jenkins. "You will cooperate fully, or face far graver consequences." Her gaze finally rested on Ms. Rachel Green, the young public defender, who looked utterly bewildered, then a profound gratitude washed over her face. Alani's expression softened infinitesimally, a subtle nod of acknowledgement. "Ms. Green," she said, her voice gentler, "your client, Mr. Jamal Dixon, is innocent. I will personally ensure that this unjust prosecution is halted immediately, and that all false charges against him are expunged. Furthermore, I believe your dedication to justice, even against overwhelming odds, speaks volumes. You will be hearing from my office regarding future opportunities." Rachel's eyes widened, a flicker of bewildered relief and awe washing over her face. Alani then turned back to Detective Sergeant Miller, who was trembling visibly, his face contorted in a silent plea. "Detective Sergeant Miller," Alani concluded, her voice low and utterly devoid of mercy, "you have just ensured that not only your employment but your entire career in law enforcement is over. Your contempt has served only to expose yourself and the rotten culture you represent. Now step down from that stand and await the federal agents who will be taking you into custody." The initial confrontation was over, and the tables had not just turned. They had been flipped with a devastating, undeniable force, setting in motion a cascade of consequences that Detective Sergeant Miller, in his small-minded prejudice, could never have anticipated. Agent Miller stepped forward, his phone still recording, a silent, implacable witness to the swift dispensing of justice. The immediate aftermath within Courtroom 3B was a swirling vortex of stunned silence, rapidly morphing into barely contained chaos. Detective Sergeant Miller, a figure of pathetic indignity, was quickly and firmly escorted from the courtroom by two federal agents who had materialized from the back rows, their faces grim and unyielding. His bluster had dissolved into incoherent whimpers and panicked, desperate pleas. Officer Jenkins, his face ashen, was led away by two other agents for immediate administrative processing. The initial whispers of shock quickly escalated into a frantic murmur as news reporters, sensing a story far larger than a petty larceny, began to scramble, their cameras flashing, their microphones thrust forward. The air in the courtroom, thick with the residue of confrontation, slowly began to clear, replaced by a growing hum of anxious anticipation. Alani, however, felt no immediate triumph. The adrenaline that had surged through her veins during the unveiling was receding, leaving behind the cold, strategic clarity of a seasoned executive. This initial skirmish, though satisfyingly decisive, was merely the prelude. She knew, with absolute certainty, that Miller was a symptom, not the disease. The true battle lay ahead, against a deeply entrenched system that had allowed such blatant prejudice and lax operational oversight to fester within its ranks. She had to ensure that this incident, however dramatic, served as a catalyst for genuine systemic change, not just a one-off dismissal. Her immediate priority was to re-establish control over the narrative and ensure that the district attorney's office, and indeed the entire local police department, understood the absolute gravity of their collective failure. She retrieved her discreet, secure phone from her pocket and issued swift, precise instructions to Agent Miller, her personal security detail, who stood by her, a silent, imposing presence. Ensure Mr. Dixon is immediately released, and all charges against him are expunged from the record, fully and without prejudice. Secure all evidence related to this case, physical and digital. Notify the Attorney General's office. I want the Chief of Police and the District Attorney in a secure conference room at my command center in 30 minutes. This cannot wait. Just as Agent Miller nodded, already on his secure line, the imposing figure of Chief Thompson, the city's chief of police, strode into the courtroom. He was a man in his late 50s, broad-shouldered, with a stern, unyielding face that usually commanded instant respect. Today, however, his face was a tight mask of professional concern, tinged with barely concealed fury. He had clearly been alerted to the unfolding disaster. Behind him trailed District Attorney Evelyn Hayes, a sharp, meticulously dressed woman in her early 40s, her usual composure replaced by a visible tremor of anxiety. Chief Thompson, upon seeing Alani, stopped short, his eyes narrowing. He had worked with federal agencies before and knew enough to recognize the weight of the Homeland Security Director's presence. He approached her, his voice a low, terse rumble, devoid of his usual polished cordiality. "Director Dubois," he began, his tone taut with barely controlled exasperation, "my staff is reporting an extraordinary incident. Something about Detective Sergeant Miller, a public dismissal, and your presence. Can you enlighten me? This sounds highly irregular and potentially very damaging for my department." His tone was accusatory, implying Alani herself was the source of the irregularity and the public embarrassment. Alani's voice, however, remained calm, steady, and utterly unruffled. She chose her words with surgical precision, each one a calculated shot aimed at the systemic failures she had observed. "Chief Thompson, District Attorney Hayes, your Detective Sergeant Miller not only exhibited gross professional misconduct, but engaged in blatant, undeniable discriminatory behavior towards an innocent citizen in your courtroom. He verbally abused and publicly defamed Mr. Jamal Dixon, attempted to convict him on fabricated evidence, and openly defied my authority, all based on transparent prejudice. My response was a necessary and immediate measure to de-escalate a volatile situation, re-establish control over due process, and confirm the gravity of his offenses when he repeatedly ignored my verbal warnings to cease and desist. Necessary? Or a highly irregular, perhaps even reckless display of authority that has now plunged my police department and the district attorney's office into a public relations nightmare?" Thompson retorted, his agitation escalating, his carefully constructed facade of calm beginning to crack. Director Dubois, we operate by established protocols, by the meticulous rules of contractual agreement and professional discretion. This public dismissal, the scene it creates. Do you understand the implications? Rumors are already swirling among other law enforcement agencies and with the local press that your actions were disproportionate, that you are unpredictable, that you acted out of personal pique, not professional necessity. We're already getting calls about potential lawsuits from Miller and the other officers, citing emotional distress and wrongful termination. His voice rose, tinged with a desperate edge. He was clearly feeling the pressure, trying to deflect blame and protect his department's image. Alani's grip tightened imperceptibly on her phone. The insidious whispers she had always quietly endured, the subtle dismissals of her competence due to her identity, the casual assumptions about her right to be in certain spaces, were now amplified, weaponized against her by a system desperate to maintain its biased status quo. She understood the precarious tightrope she walked. A black female director of Homeland Security, already navigating a predominantly white, male-dominated federal landscape, had just executed a maneuver that, in entrenched circles, would be seen as an outrageous breach of decorum, an unforgivable overstep. Her integrity, her hard-earned reputation, even her future collaborations within the broader law enforcement community, now hung by a single fraying thread. The institutional inertia, the desire to maintain the status quo and avoid controversy, was a far more formidable opponent than Miller's petty tyranny. Chief Thompson, District Attorney Hayes, members of the committee, Alani interjected, her voice firm, cutting through his agitated monologue. My actions were in direct response to a criminal act, an act of discriminatory profiling and gross negligence regarding a citizen's fundamental rights. Furthermore, given the nature of the original complaints I've discreetly gathered about your department, Detective Sergeant Miller's behavior leads me to believe this is not an isolated incident, but indicative of a deeper, more dangerous systemic problem within your police department's culture. My concern is not personal. It is for the safety, privacy, and equitable treatment of all citizens, and for the integrity of the justice system you purport to uphold. Thompson sighed, a frustrated, exasperated sound that resonated with the immense pressure he was under. Fine, Director Dubois, fine. But this has put us in an impossible position. Our legal team is already screaming for a full internal inquiry into your conduct, citing judicial bias and improper procedure. The optics are abysmal. We need to handle this with the utmost delicacy to avoid a public relations catastrophe and a potentially damaging lawsuit against us. I am already en route to the precinct with District Attorney Hayes. You will be there. You need to explain yourself, and you need to convince us that this isn't a pattern of uncontrolled behavior. Your continued contract with federal agencies, and indeed your future ability to collaborate on joint task forces, could hinge on this. The call ended abruptly, the dial tone a flat, final note in the sudden silence of the courtroom. Alani pushed herself away from the table and walked to a deserted corner of the courtroom, looking out at the city streets through the large, grimy window. She closed her eyes for a moment, visualizing the precise details of Miller's actions, recalling his exact words, the subtle facial expressions of Officer Jenkins, and the dawning terror on his face. More importantly, she thought of Jamal, the innocent young man, and the countless other individuals, defendants and citizens alike, who had likely faced similar microaggressions and overt biases in their daily interactions within this seemingly impartial system. This was not just about one detective sergeant. It was about the culture of an entire organization. She opened her eyes, resolve hardening her jaw. She wouldn't just defend her actions. She would turn this crisis into an unprecedented opportunity. Miller's contempt, his open prejudice, had, ironically, been a gift. It had allowed Alani to publicly reveal a hidden aspect of her power, to hint at an expertise that went far beyond mere national security. It had forced the issue into the light. She pulled out her secure, government-grade tablet, a piece of equipment far more advanced than anything a typical citizen would carry, capable of secure communication and forensic data analysis on the fly. Her fingers, still possessing the speed and precision of a seasoned investigator, began to tap furiously across the encrypted screen. She started compiling a detailed dossier, not just on Miller's contempt, but on the deeper, more insidious web of discriminatory practices and systemic procedural shortcuts that her long-term discreet observations of the local police department had already begun to uncover. She would present it to Chief Thompson and District Attorney Hayes, not as a defensive explanation, but as a compelling, undeniable reason for her unprecedented actions. She would highlight the specific nuances of employee misconduct, the subtle evasions of ethical protocols, the ingrained culture of bias that an ordinary citizen might miss, but which screamed systemic failure to a mind as acutely perceptive as hers. She would argue that her prior experience, her unique perspective as a black woman in a position of immense power, was not a liability to be excused, but an indispensable asset in this specific case, and indeed for the future of ethical, equitable law enforcement. Her ultimate gamble: she wouldn't just ask for Miller's termination and a public apology. She would demand more. She would propose an expanded, nationwide investigation into law enforcement conduct and citizen discrimination, leveraging her unique methodologies and her considerable federal influence to identify similar patterns across the entire country. She would not allow herself to be silenced or sidelined. She would face the police department's highest authorities head-on, not as an aggrieved citizen seeking redress, but as an uncompromising force for change, ready to expose a deeper truth that threatened the very fabric of American justice. The integrity of the justice system, her own integrity, and the very concept of impartial, equitable law enforcement depended on it. She was, in this moment, isolated, but armed with a formidable intellect, an unshakable moral compass, and a hidden power that few truly understood. The gauntlet had been thrown, and Director Alani Dubois, the quiet, underestimated force, was ready to pick it up, not just for herself, but for every individual who had ever felt invisible, disrespected, or judged by those in positions of petty authority. The emergency, high-stakes meeting room at the district police precinct, usually a bastion of subdued authority and hushed, almost reverent, legal discourse, now crackled with an almost palpable tension. The air was thick with the weight of expectation, simmering skepticism, and the faint, lingering scent of stale coffee that did little to cut through the pervasive anxiety. Chief Thompson, the city's meticulously dressed chief of police, his face a tight mask of professional concern, sat at the head of the polished conference table. Beside him sat District Attorney Evelyn Hayes, her usual sharp composure replaced by a visible tremor of apprehension. Arrayed around the table were other senior police captains and legal advisors, their expressions ranging from open curiosity to barely concealed disapproval, their collective concern etched deeply onto their faces. They represented the bedrock of the local justice system and were ready to dissect and interrogate Director Alani Dubois on her unprecedented actions in Courtroom 3B earlier that morning. Alani walked in, her stride composed, her posture unwavering, exuding a quiet confidence that seemed to absorb the room's ambient tension rather than succumb to it. She carried only her slim, secure government-grade tablet, its dark screen a stark contrast to the thick binders and legal pads usually present at such high-stakes corporate interrogations. She chose her seat, directly facing the array of executives, her gaze sweeping over each member, meeting their scrutiny with an unwavering, almost defiant resolve. She wasn't here to apologize for her actions. She was here to justify them, to expose a truth far more profound and dangerous than a single act of contempt, a truth that struck at the very heart of their operations. Chief Thompson cleared his throat, his voice formal, betraying none of the earlier agitation from their phone call, a carefully cultivated mask of professional decorum. Director Dubois, thank you for attending on such short notice. We are here to discuss the deeply concerning events of this morning's proceedings concerning the case of Mr. Jamal Dixon. Specifically, your unconventional response to our Detective Sergeant Miller and the highly unusual public display of your personal identification. The department requires a thorough, unvarnished explanation of your actions and the circumstances that necessitated them. We understand you felt aggrieved, but surely such drastic measures were unwarranted. His tone was polite, yet subtly condescending, clearly implying Alani had overreacted. Alani nodded, her expression resolute, betraying nothing. Chief Thompson, District Attorney Hayes, members of the committee. I understand your concerns regarding department decorum, operational procedure, and the public perception of the police department. My actions this morning were indeed unconventional, by design. But they were not impulsive, nor were they born of personal pique or a desire for theatrics. They were a direct, calculated response to a blatant, egregious assault on an innocent citizen's personal dignity, a severe breach of his privacy, and a fundamental disregard for the constitutional obligations that this police department has to its citizens. Her voice was calm, measured, utterly devoid of defensiveness, yet imbued with an undeniable, steely authority. Each word was carefully chosen, each phrase weighted with purpose. When a detective sergeant, in a position of public trust, openly mocks a citizen, attempts to convict them on fabricated evidence, and openly defies judicial authority, a mere verbal complaint, in that moment, would have been woefully insufficient to stem the tide of his defiance and the chilling effect it had on the integrity of your operations. My actions were a necessary escalation. District Attorney Evelyn Hayes interjected, her tone sharp, her eyes narrowed with a prosecutor's skepticism. She was less concerned with decorum than with legal liability. But a public dismissal, Director Dubois, of a seasoned detective sergeant and administrative leave for another officer? That is an extraordinary, unprecedented measure for what appears to be a dispute with an employee. It could be perceived, and indeed is being perceived by our human resources and legal departments, as an unfair leveraging of your substantial federal influence against a lower-level employee. It sets a dangerous precedent. We are already dealing with a deluge of media inquiries, and a formal grievance from Mr. Miller and the other officers alleging harassment, emotional distress, and wrongful termination. This is a significant liability. Her words hung in the air, a thinly veiled accusation, asserting the department's power and hinting at potential counteraction. This was the very hang-by-a-single-hair moment Alani had anticipated, the critical juncture where her true power and the fate of her mission for systemic change would be decided. The room leaned in, waiting for her defense, for her to falter, to show a flicker of regret or uncertainty. She took a slow, deliberate breath, the weight of not just her reputation, but the broader implications for the entire law enforcement community, pressing down on her. This was where she turned the tables. Respectfully, Chief Thompson, District Attorney Hayes, members of the committee, Alani began, her gaze unwavering, holding Ms. Hayes's. My background, as many of you are aware, extends beyond national security policy. My tenure with the FAA's Special Investigations Unit, particularly within the Covert Operations and Financial Crimes Division, is not merely an affiliation or a personal dramatic flair. It is a deep, specialized expertise in identifying, infiltrating, and dismantling complex systemic failures and criminal enterprises that often hide behind seemingly mundane operational procedures. When Detective Sergeant Miller began to engage in abusive, racially charged, and utterly contemptuous behavior in your courtroom, openly mocking an innocent citizen, attempting to convict him on false pretenses, and openly insulting his presence, I observed patterns, not just of individual misconduct, but of systemic obfuscation, patterns of deep-seated prejudice and alarming procedural laxity that screamed of a broader, more dangerous problem within this police department's operational culture. She activated her tablet, its screen springing to life with a soft hum. With a practiced tap, she projected a complex, color-coded flowchart onto the large, wall-mounted screen at the head of the table. It was a dense, intricate diagram, teeming with interconnected arrows, anonymous internal complaint codes, recurring procedural bypasses, encrypted financial anomalies, and even snippets of recorded conversations, far more detailed and damning than anything presented in the department's internal audits or public reports. While observing this specific trial, as a concerned citizen, my specialized training compelled me to look far beyond the superficial legal proceedings, Alani continued, her voice now morphing into the precise analytical cadence of a seasoned, unyielding investigator, the transformation palpable in the room. I independently cross-referenced publicly available social media reviews, anonymized internal employee surveys I discreetly obtained from whistleblowers, and this department's own publicly filed incident reports with my own proprietary database of recurrent behavioral patterns. What I found were not isolated anomalies, gentlemen and ladies. I found a consistent, disturbing pattern. A pattern of discriminatory officers consistently arresting or targeting citizens based on arbitrary pretexts, often correlating with their appearance, ethnicity, or socioeconomic status. A pattern of critical investigative and civil rights protocols being rushed or entirely bypassed during peak operational times to cut corners and maximize arrest quotas. And a pattern of documented instances where citizen complaints, particularly those alleging discrimination or police misconduct, were systematically minimized, miscategorized, or outright dismissed by lower-level management, protecting problematic employees rather than addressing the core issues. She tapped the screen again, highlighting a series of interconnected nodes on the chart. Each node represented a specific date, a specific incident, a specific precinct, and a specific officer or management decision. The cumulative effect was damning, revealing a pervasive, toxic culture. These are not just isolated incidents of poor policing or employee disputes, she explained, pointing to various clustered nodes on the diagram, each one a red flag. This is a systemic, deeply ingrained cultural problem within this police department's operations, where discriminatory practices are either explicitly sanctioned, tacitly ignored, or outright enabled by a lack of proper oversight and accountability from leadership. Detective Sergeant Miller's contemptuous behavior this morning, his desperate and misguided attempt to deny me access to due process, was not just arrogance. It was a direct, calculated act to prevent us from uncovering this entire, much deeper network of systemic failures and discriminatory practices. As she spoke, Agent Miller, who had positioned himself discreetly near the door, activated a pre-recorded audio file. The room was suddenly filled with Detective Sergeant Miller's harsh, grating laughter from the courtroom, his dismissive words, "The kid's guilty. We both know it. He fits the profile. Always does." The recording continued, capturing Officer Jenkins's snickers and Miller's escalating insults, a chilling, undeniable soundtrack to Alani's precise exposition. The final damning audio clip was a conversation between Miller and a supervisor, recorded weeks earlier, discussing how to handle citizens who don't understand their place, a clear-coded reference to people like Jamal, and by extension, Alani herself. The committee members, initially skeptical, began to lean forward, their expressions shifting from doubt to intense, almost horrified fascination. Several instinctively pulled out their own pens, making rapid notes, their eyes glued to the complex damning diagram on the screen and the horrifying audio playing in the background. Chief Thompson's jaw had dropped slightly, his usual composure dissolving as his eyes darted between the projected evidence, the live recording of his detective's bigotry, and Alani's unflinching face. District Attorney Hayes's usually impenetrable prosecutor's facade had cracked, revealing a flicker of genuine shock and dawning dread. They realized the immense legal exposure their department and office faced, not just from a citizen dispute, but from a potential class action lawsuit for systemic discrimination that Alani's evidence could fuel. "My direct action this morning, Chief Thompson," District Attorney Hayes, Alani concluded, her voice gaining a quiet, undeniable power that resonated through the room, silencing even the recording, "was not an act of intimidation designed for a lower-level employee. It was an immediate, nonverbal communication, precisely calculated and delivered at a critical juncture, to Mr. Miller and to any other officer observing, that their contempt, their prejudice, and their systemic violations would not, under any circumstances, be tolerated. It was a precise, strategic decision to signal that they could not, and would not, escape accountability by belittling the citizen or attempting to obstruct an investigation. It was a clear, unambiguous statement that Director Alani Dubois knows exactly what is happening within your organization, and I am prepared to act. Not just for myself, but for every single individual who has been dismissed, disrespected, or discriminated against by your department." A profound, stunned silence filled the room. The committee members exchanged glances, a dawning realization spreading across their faces, chilling them to the bone. Alani hadn't just defended her actions, she had turned the tables completely, revealing a layer of systemic corruption and blatant civil rights violations they hadn't even suspected. Her unconventional action was now revealed as a stroke of strategic brilliance, born from an unparalleled expertise and a moral compass that pointed relentlessly towards true justice. She hadn't just reacted, she had preempted, observed, and now delivered an undeniable, devastating indictment. Then Chief Thompson broke the silence. He slowly rose from his seat, his gaze fixed on Alani, his expression a mixture of awe, profound respect, and dawning dread at the implications. He looked utterly defeated, yet paradoxically, a strange sense of relief seemed to settle on his features, the relief of a festering wound finally exposed. "Director Dubois," he said, his voice husky with emotion, completely devoid of his earlier irritation and defensiveness. "You have not only clarified your actions beyond any reasonable doubt, but you have also, and far more significantly, unveiled a far graver systemic threat to our operational integrity, our reputation, and indeed, our entire department. Your unique qualifications are clearly not just an asset. They are, quite frankly, an indispensable necessity for this department's survival, and dare I say, its future." He turned to District Attorney Hayes and the other committee members, his voice now ringing with decisive, almost desperate authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is unequivocally clear to me that not only was Director Dubois' response entirely justified, but her insights and her continued oversight of this matter are absolutely essential. District Attorney Hayes, I want a full, unreserved public apology issued to Director Dubois and Mr. Dixon immediately. Furthermore, we will cooperate fully with any and all investigations she deems necessary. Every single officer, from the ground up, will undergo mandatory, rigorous anti-discrimination and citizens' rights training, overseen directly by Director Dubois' appointed team. We will launch an immediate, comprehensive internal audit into every aspect of our operations, particularly regarding citizen complaints and officer conduct under her direct supervision. And Detective Sergeant Miller, along with any other officers found to have engaged in similar behavior, will face not just termination, but criminal charges where applicable. His behavior and the systemic issues it exposed demand the full force of our legal and disciplinary action." A chorus of agreement, laced with murmurs of admiration and immediate calls for action, rippled through the room. The tide had turned completely. Alani hadn't just survived the gauntlet, she had conquered it, transforming a moment of public scrutiny and potential corporate retaliation into a powerful testament to her unparalleled capabilities and a watershed moment for justice within the local law enforcement. Her quiet resolve had pierced through layers of prejudice and complacency, exposing the truth for all to see. Meanwhile, back at the precinct, Detective Sergeant Miller, still reeling from the shocking revelation of Alani's identity, sat in a small, windowless interrogation room, guarded by a grim-faced Agent Miller. His hastily summoned lawyer, a junior associate from the city's legal department, looked utterly defeated, already having received frantic high-priority instructions from District Attorney Hayes. The initial charges of insubordination and wrongful termination now seemed trivial. News from the executive meeting room, carried by frantic phone calls and hushed whispers among the precinct staff, had begun to filter down. Blake's face, which had been ashen, now turned a sickly green. He could hear the distinct sound of more federal agents arriving, their authoritative voices and purposeful strides echoing down the corridor. He was no longer just dealing with a disgruntled citizen. His interrogation room door swung open, revealing two figures. A stern-faced, impeccably dressed federal agent from the Department of Justice, carrying a thick legal file, and, to Miller's utter horror, Director Alani Dubois herself, no longer in her casual suit, but now in a sharp, dark federal uniform, her eyes cold and resolute, utterly devoid of mercy. She held a warrant in her hand, not just for his immediate termination, but for a new, expanded list of potential federal charges, including civil rights violations, obstruction of justice, and potentially even corporate negligence related to the systematic discriminatory practices that Alani had meticulously documented within the police department. "Detective Sergeant Miller," Alani stated, her voice calm, powerful, and utterly devoid of emotion, her face impassive. "Effective immediately, the incident in the courtroom has escalated into a full-scale federal investigation. Your immediate termination from the police department is now a formality. Your contempt on the stand, your blatant discriminatory actions, and your gross professional misconduct merely expedited this process and revealed the deeper systemic issues we were already investigating within your organization. My background, as you now know, has equipped me to recognize precisely the kind of intricate, insidious prejudice and procedural neglect you and others have been orchestrating. Detective Sergeant Miller's face, which had been ashen, now turned a sickly, mottled gray. He tried to speak, his mouth opening and closing uselessly, but no words came out. The formidable Detective Sergeant, the man who had dared to mock and humiliate an innocent citizen based on his appearance, was utterly, completely broken. The laughter and sneers had ceased, replaced by the chilling silence of inevitable, uncompromising corporate and federal justice. His petty power, his perceived influence, his entire miserable world had just collapsed around him, brought down by the very woman he had so arrogantly scorned. The catharsis was complete. The seismic shockwaves of Director Alani Dubois' revelation and subsequent decisive actions in Courtroom 3B reverberated far beyond the confines of the local judicial district. The incident, witnessed by startled court personnel and quickly spreading via hushed, frantic phone calls among law enforcement circles, transformed from a mere local disturbance into a potent, system-shaking expose. The image of Alani, calm and resolute, wielding her federal credential against the backdrop of Detective Sergeant Miller's crumbling arrogance, became a powerful, albeit privately circulated symbol. For Detective Sergeant Miller himself, the descent from his petty, self-appointed throne was as swift as it was absolute. Escorted from the precinct in handcuffs by federal agents, his once immaculate uniform now seemed to sag, a cruel mockery of his former, albeit limited, authority. The immediate termination from the police department was merely the first domino to fall. His public humiliation was quickly followed by formal federal indictments for obstruction of justice, gross professional misconduct, and, most damningly, civil rights violations stemming from documented patterns of discriminatory behavior. He faced a lengthy prison sentence, his bitter pleas for leniency falling on deaf ears. His downfall became a stark, chilling deterrent, a vivid reminder that no amount of prejudice or perceived status could outrun the long arm of federal law, especially when confronted by someone as unyielding and prepared as Director Alani Dubois. The ripple effect extended throughout the local police department, forcing a painful but necessary reckoning. The viral whispers, coupled with Alani's meticulously compiled dossier, a comprehensive indictment not just of Miller, but of a deeply ingrained corporate culture of negligence and subtle prejudice, ignited an inferno of citizen outrage and immediate regulatory action from the relevant state and federal oversight bodies. The police department, facing massive potential fines, a precipitous drop in public trust, and the very real threat of losing federal funding, underwent a radical, painful overhaul. Executives implicated in turning a blind eye to the problematic culture were fired. Systemic biases within their training and hiring programs were rooted out, and a new comprehensive diversity and inclusion initiative was launched, monitored directly by Alani's now elevated influence within the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Justice. The department issued a public, unreserved apology to Director Alani Dubois and to all citizens who had experienced discrimination, a mea culpa broadcast across local news outlets and discreetly circulated among their community liaisons, aiming to mend a public image that had been shattered by Miller's egregious actions and the department's own complicity. The ripple effect also reached those touched by the initial confrontation, transforming lives in unexpected ways. Jamal Dixon, the young college student, found his life irrevocably altered. Not only were all false charges against him immediately and permanently expunged, but Director Dubois personally ensured he received a full scholarship to any university of his choosing, allowing him to pursue his passion for astrophysics without the burden of legal debt or a tainted record. Jamal, profoundly impacted by Alani's intervention, dedicated himself to his studies, eventually earning a doctorate and becoming an advocate for STEM education in underserved communities, embodying the positive change Alani sought to inspire. His story became a powerful example of how one act of injustice, when confronted with courage, could lead to unexpected opportunities. Officer Jenkins, who had initially smirked alongside Miller, found his perspective irrevocably shifted. Witnessing Alani's calm, undeniable authority and the damning evidence she presented, he underwent a profound reevaluation of his own ingrained assumptions. He apologized to Alani personally, a quiet, sincere moment of humility at the precinct after Miller had been led away. Inspired by her unwavering commitment to justice, Officer Jenkins became an unlikely, yet powerful advocate for fairness within the police force. He actively pushed for mandatory diversity and sensitivity training for his colleagues, reporting subtle instances of profiling and ensuring all citizens, regardless of appearance, were treated with respect. He became a trusted point of contact for Alani's team whenever her operations touched down in the city, a testament to his genuine growth and newfound principles. He was eventually promoted, becoming a beacon of ethical policing within his precinct. Alani herself, however, felt no grand sense of personal triumph. The catharsis was internal, a quiet satisfaction that justice, often slow and circuitous, had been served swiftly and decisively. Her actions had cleared the air, demonstrating that true authority stemmed not from intimidation or prejudice, but from unwavering integrity and a profound commitment to justice. Her initial moniker, the Quiet Innovator, had now broadened. Whispers in the halls of power, from federal agencies in Washington, D.C., to local precincts across the nation, referred to her now as the architect of law enforcement justice, acknowledging her profound impact on systemic change within the intricate, often insular world of public safety. She still maintained her disciplined routine, rising before dawn for Krav Maga, her mind as sharp and agile as her body. This wasn't merely about personal success. It was about ensuring that the scales of justice were balanced for everyone who dared to dream of safe, equitable, and dignified treatment under the law. Her work became a living testament to her belief that true progress wasn't just about catching individual wrongdoers, but about dismantling the flawed systems that enabled them. The Executive Committee of the Police Department, along with Chief Thompson and District Attorney Hayes, now chastened by their initial skepticism and profoundly impressed by Alani's strategic brilliance, issued an unprecedented internal memo. It not only strongly commended Director Alani Dubois' exceptional judgment, unparalleled expertise, and unwavering commitment to ethical conduct and civil liberties, but also acknowledged that her unconventional actions were, in fact, crucial to uncovering a vast industry-wide problem of systemic prejudice and procedural laxity within their own ranks. More significantly, Chief Thompson, a man of profound integrity who had once harbored his own quiet reservations about Alani's assertive style, sought her out personally. In the quiet solitude of his executive office, overlooking the sprawling city, he offered a profound, heartfelt apology, one he had rarely given in his long, successful career. "Director Dubois," he began, his voice thick with regret, "I owe you a sincere, unreserved apology. My initial concerns about your methods, my preoccupation with maintaining external decorum and protecting the department's immediate interests, blinded me to the deeper justice you were pursuing. You saw what none of us did. Your integrity, your courage, and your extraordinary investigative skills are not just an asset to Homeland Security. They are, quite frankly, an absolute necessity for this department's future and for the entire law enforcement sector." He paused, his gaze, now filled with profound respect, meeting hers. "You are truly a remarkable individual, Director Dubois. Your actions saved this department from a far greater crisis." This wasn't just an apology, it was a profound affirmation. Thompson, deeply impressed by her strategic brilliance and unwavering commitment, offered her a new, groundbreaking opportunity. He proposed the establishment of a specialized national task force on law enforcement integrity and diversity, directly under the purview of the Department of Homeland Security, one designed to proactively investigate and audit systemic issues of misconduct, discrimination, and procedural negligence across all major local and state law enforcement agencies, using undercover methodologies and cutting-edge data analysis. And he asked Alani to head it, granting her unprecedented autonomy, a significantly expanded budget drawn from federal contributions, and direct access to top-level resources to leverage her unique expertise to its fullest potential. This was more than just a collaboration. It was a recognition of her singular abilities, a chance to fundamentally reshape a critical, often insular aspect of the justice system, and extend her reach far beyond the confines of a single police precinct. It was the meaningful opportunity that allowed her to truly flourish, using her past as a foundation for unprecedented innovation within the federal regulatory world and beyond. This new, pivotal role allowed Alani to immerse herself fully in the kind of intricate investigative and systemic reform work she excelled at, bridging the gap between raw data, human behavior, and prosecutorial action. She became a driving force in identifying dormant prejudice networks, rooting out corrupt practices, and implementing robust ethical training programs across the entire law enforcement industry. Her keen eye for detail and her profound understanding of human psychology, honed by years of observation and intervention, proved invaluable. She found herself working in synergy with former federal colleagues, leveraging her network to bring unprecedented scrutiny to an industry that had long operated under its own, often lax rules. One crisp autumn afternoon, months after Detective Sergeant Miller's final sentencing and the complete overhaul at the local police department, Alani found herself walking through the bustling, newly transparent and welcoming police headquarters, a profound sense of purpose in her stride. She spotted Agent Miller, her head of security, who was overseeing the meticulous preparation of a highly sensitive undercover operation. Agent Miller, always efficient, noticed her. "Director Dubois," Agent Miller said, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips, as he approached with a tablet displaying a detailed operational plan. "Just got word from the National Task Force. Another successful audit completed in Chicago. They uncovered a major loophole in a regional department's evidence collection process that was enabling discriminatory practices. They're facing massive penalties and a forced restructuring." Alani nodded, a soft, content smile touching her lips, a rare sight for those who didn't know her well. "Excellent work, Agent Miller. These are the victories that truly matter. Every single data point, every careful observation contributes to making our communities safer and more equitable for everyone." She then looked at Agent Miller, her eyes warm with genuine appreciation. "And to think, it all started with one detective sergeant who thought he could get away with anything. Your discretion and foresight were invaluable." Agent Miller simply nodded, a look of quiet pride on his face. The law enforcement sector, once a place where subtle biases and entrenched power structures often went unchallenged, had begun to subtly transform under Alani's influence. Her calm, decisive actions had cleared the air, demonstrating that true authority stemmed not from intimidation or prejudice, but from unwavering integrity and a profound commitment to justice. The atmosphere was no longer cold and impersonal, but imbued with a quiet professionalism that valued merit and equity above all else. Alani had not just won a case, she had sparked a quiet revolution within the exclusive world of law enforcement. 5 years later, the very fabric of American law enforcement, particularly within its local and state agencies, seemed to hum with a different, more harmonious energy. The pervasive atmosphere of dismissive prejudice and systemic complacency that had once subtly permeated police precincts and courtrooms had largely dissipated, replaced by a tangible sense of improved professionalism, genuine respect, and equitable treatment. It was a transformation directly attributable to the quiet, yet profound influence of Director Alani Dubois. The echoes of Detective Sergeant Miller's sneering contempt and the initial defensive backlash from police chiefs and district attorneys had long faded, replaced by widespread recognition of Alani's unyielding integrity and her strategic foresight. Director Alani Dubois, now universally revered not just for her keen regulatory mind, but for her unshakable moral compass, had become one of the most influential and respected figures in the U.S. federal justice system, and indeed, a global thought leader in ethical law enforcement. The specialized National Task Force on Law Enforcement Integrity and Diversity she spearheaded had flourished beyond all expectations, becoming a benchmark for proactive oversight, ethics, and best practices within the often opaque world of public safety. Her unique blend of federal authority and deep investigative acumen, forged during her challenging years with the FAA's Special Investigations Unit, proved to be an unstoppable force against white-collar misconduct, systemic discrimination, and even subtle forms of corporate negligence. Under her relentless guidance, the task force had dismantled several intricate, multi-layered corruption networks, exposed pervasive patterns of bias across multiple major police departments, and, most importantly, implemented industry-wide policy changes that recovered billions in illicit gains while significantly enhancing citizen safety, privacy, and civil liberties. She no longer needed to publicly display her platinum identification card as a tool for confrontation. Its power was woven into the very fabric of her reputation, her every action, and the transformed institutions she had helped reshape. Her initial moniker, the Quiet Innovator, had been almost entirely forgotten by the broader public, superseded by a more resonant title. Now, whispers in the highest echelons of government, from federal agencies in Washington, D.C., to local precincts across the sprawling nation, referred to her with deep respect as the architect of law enforcement justice, acknowledging her profound and lasting impact on systemic change within the intricate, often resistant, world of public safety. She still maintained her disciplined routine, rising before dawn for her rigorous Krav Maga sessions, her mind as sharp and agile as her body. This consistent self-mastery was not merely about personal well-being. It was about ensuring she remained at peak performance to champion a cause far greater than herself. Her work was a testament to the belief that true progress wasn't just about catching individual wrongdoers, but about dismantling the flawed systems that enabled them, ensuring justice wasn't just served, but permanently built into the very foundations of the American justice system. Emily Chen, inspired directly by Alani's courage and unwavering stand, had ascended rapidly within the prosecution ranks. She was now a prominent federal prosecutor specializing in civil rights and corporate accountability, renowned for her meticulous preparation and unshakable ethical stance. Emily had become a mentor herself, actively seeking out and nurturing young lawyers, particularly women and minorities, instilling in them the same principles of integrity, resilience, and fierce dedication to justice that Alani Dubois had so powerfully embodied. She frequently cited Alani's story, a powerful, real-world testament to the transformative power of standing firm in the face of prejudice and institutional inertia. Emily often found herself working alongside Alani's task force, coordinating legal action against departments and individuals exposed by the National Task Force, a formidable duo in the relentless pursuit of justice. As for Detective Sergeant Miller, his reign of petty tyranny and prejudice was a distant, bitter memory. He languished in a maximum security federal prison, his once immaculate uniform replaced by standard-issue prison garb, his contemptuous sneer utterly extinguished. His ill-gotten gains and any remaining personal assets were confiscated as part of his restitution for the significant damages incurred by the police department due to his actions and the subsequent forced restructuring. His downfall served as a permanent, chilling deterrent for other law enforcement personnel, a stark, public demonstration that no one, regardless of their perceived status or ingrained biases, was above the law when the relentless pursuit of justice, spearheaded by Director Alani Dubois, was brought to bear. Alani's profound impact extended far beyond the immediate outcomes of her cases and investigations. Driven by a deep-seated desire to ensure that talent and integrity were never again overlooked or stifled due to prejudice, she personally established the Dubois Foundation for Justice and Opportunity. This national program provided comprehensive scholarships, intensive mentorship, and practical training for aspiring legal professionals and law enforcement specialists from underserved communities, actively encouraging them to pursue challenging careers within the FBI, the Department of Justice, and other federal law enforcement agencies, as well as within local police departments, promoting a new generation of ethical leaders. She frequently delivered keynote addresses at prestigious legal conferences, law enforcement summits, and university commencements, sharing her own story not as a tale of personal triumph, but as a compelling call to action for systemic change and a powerful reminder that every single individual had the power to contribute to a more just world. Her speeches resonated deeply, inspiring millions and fostering a new generation to champion justice with both sharp intellect and unwavering moral courage. On a crisp autumn afternoon, precisely 5 years to the day after the infamous courtroom incident, Alani sat in her meticulously organized, spacious office at Homeland Security Headquarters, reviewing a new, groundbreaking policy proposal for mandatory anti-bias training across all federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies. A soft knock at the door, and her chief of special operations, Agent Miller, entered, a stack of freshly organized, color-coded reports in his hand. Agent Miller, now an even more confident, exceptionally competent, and utterly indispensable part of Alani's inner circle, moved with a quiet efficiency and assuredness that completely belied his once strictly reserved demeanor. He had found his true purpose, thriving under Alani's direct yet empowering mentorship, having grown alongside her as she spearheaded industry-wide change. "Director Dubois," Agent Miller said, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips, as he approached with a tablet displaying a detailed operational plan. "Just got word from the National Task Force. Another successful audit completed in Chicago. They uncovered a major loophole in a regional department's evidence collection process that was enabling discriminatory practices. They're facing massive penalties and a forced restructuring." Alani nodded, a soft, content smile touching her lips, a rare sight for those who didn't know her well. "Excellent work, Agent Miller. These are the victories that truly matter. Every single data point, every careful observation contributes to making our communities safer and more equitable for everyone." She then looked at Agent Miller, her eyes warm with genuine appreciation. "And to think, it all started with one detective sergeant who thought he could get away with anything. Your discretion and foresight were invaluable." Agent Miller simply nodded, a look of quiet pride on his face. The law enforcement sector, once a place where subtle biases and entrenched power structures often went unchallenged, had begun to subtly transform under Alani's influence. Her calm, decisive actions had cleared the air, demonstrating that true authority stemmed not from intimidation or prejudice, but from unwavering integrity and a profound commitment to justice. The atmosphere was no longer cold and impersonal, but imbued with a quiet professionalism that valued merit and equity above all else. Alani had not just won a case, she had sparked a quiet revolution within the exclusive world of law enforcement. If this story stirred your heart, if it reminds you that courage can alter destinies and that light always finds a path even in the deepest darkness, please leave a comment. Share this story with those who need inspiration. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell to never miss our upcoming stories.